This podcast is a proud representative of The Wellness Company. Go to twc.health/alternate take for all your wellness needs and type in the promo code alternate take, one word, for 10% off. You guys, in today's world, health has never been more important. In fact, it's one of the coolest subjects we've been able to touch on here at Alternate Take, and we've gotten some amazing guests to have discussions with, including Dr. Peter McCullough, who you all know as probably the most famous doctor in the world ever since his episodes on Joe Rogan. He is the Chief Scientific Officer of the Wellness Company, and nothing goes through this whole company without his knowledge. If it's certified by Dr. Peter McCullough, it's certified by us. The Wellness Company is unequivocally and unapologetically standing up for medical freedom and the right to affordable health care. This company has always put the patient first. If you go on their website at twc.health, you'll see all natural products and everything that's going to make you a better human being. Guys, let's get healthy before we even get to the hospital, before we get serious problems. This is the place you got to go. Go to the website, twc.health/alternate take, promo code alternate take, one word, for 10% off, and thank us later. Get healthy, guys. Your family's dependent on you. What's up, everybody, and welcome to Alternate Take. Today we have the awesome, the legendary Jim Lampley. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing good, sir. I'm very excited to have you on the show. As if I'm sure everyone tells you that already whenever they get to host you or get to talk to you. But this is a very fun one, especially with so many things coming up in your life. You got the return of your ringside career, which everyone's excited for on May 2nd. We got your upcoming book that I can't wait to talk about. It happened. And all that being said, there's so much more we got to talk about, just the history of Jim Lampley. So I'm excited to have you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about the book and also the sudden return to ringside blow by blow, which was unexpected but very welcome. So here we are.
Yeah, it blows my mind that it's even considered unexpected. Because I say all the time, like, you are, in my opinion, you're the Vince Scully of boxing. Like that, you are the voice of. I have friends that don't even watch boxing, and then I was telling them that I was interviewing you, and they're like, I don't really watch boxing, and then I showed them a picture, like, oh yeah, I know that guy, because you are the voice of boxing. You're the face of boxing for so long. So even people that haven't seen a fight in 10 years, they still know who you are. So the fact that it's unexpected for you to come back, or that it's even like a question, is so crazy to me in the first place.
After a 6-year absence from ringside blow by blow. And I am as baffled as anybody as to why it has taken this long for somebody to want to reach out and say, come back, do blow by blow commentary for us. I have not bothered to undertake any granular investigation as to why I was left aside, but all credit goes to a wonderful woman named Dale Hopkins, who several months ago, almost a year ago, came to me and said, hey, I've got something you can do at ringside, ppv.com. Involve yourself in a live chat format, which is cooperative with the audience. Audience members get to join the chat with you and the other people on the chat. And that brought me back to ringside, brought me back to media rooms in Las Vegas and New York and elsewhere, and reactivated Jim Lampley as an editorial commentator relative to boxing. It's not blow by blow, but it's something similar, and it brought me back, and I owe a lot to Dale Hopkins. I don't know if I would have been invited by the Sheikh to call the big fights that the Sheikh is making if it hadn't been for ppv.com. But one way or the other, he reached out, and now here we are going forward with blow by blow again.
I love it. It's great news. I'm sure everyone is excited. I'm thrilled that it feels like boxing's back. So I'm pumped.
Well, they're big fights. You know, I'm not going to be doing small fights. I'm going to be doing big fights because that's what he wants to do. That's the reason he's in this business. So it's exactly the level and the kind of position I would have wanted, and to have waited so long and have it suddenly show up like this is tremendously gratifying for me.
Yeah, and it only makes sense considering, I mean, your first fight ever was Mike Tyson. It's like big fights are all you know, and I feel like that's you're gonna have the big fights. You're gonna bring him back. You're gonna bring back a level of boxing that fans have been wanting for years, where you stack a card and you finally give it like the respect it deserves. I was talking to Robert Garcia about a year ago, and he was talking to me about the cards that were made in the 80s and like early 90s that were just like just championship after championship after championship just on the whole fight night. And now it's for a long time we didn't get that, and now it seems like we're getting what we want, and we're getting full fight replays on YouTube like a week later. It's crazy. I What do you think about the whole process of that, the Middle East, and how involved they are in boxing now?
Well, boxing is like any seed crop that has to be brought to fruition. It needs money, and development requires money. Fighters' careers require money. Making big fights requires money. So if Western culture has its doubts, and that's pretty chronic, it's been going on for more than 100 years. Western culture has its doubts about boxing and the certainty of the return, et cetera, et cetera. And somebody from another culture is a huge fan, obviously passionately interested, has the wherewithal to support major competition. This is all good for boxing. I don't see any downside. What I see are great fights being made because the Sheikh wants to make them, and I get a chance to call some of them. So all good with me.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I think the coolest part is seeing it all come down to a point to where you finally are so excited to see every level of the fight. Arnold Barboza is fighting, and he's a good friend of ours, and obviously we're gonna be rooting for him. Teofimo's a great fighter too, and whoever wins, I just want a great fight. But Arnold used to work with my brother at a warehouse like years ago, 10, 15 years ago, before when he was already professional with Top Rank. But its story is really cool to hear about what he would do. He would work, early morning shifts at this warehouse. He'd run 13 miles to his gym, train there for 4, run back, go take his kid to school, sleep 3 hours, go back to work. It's stories like that that make boxing so special. Like I don't even know if anyone knows that about Arnold's career,
I,
but
I totally agree. He is a great story. I was working for PPV.com the night of the Ryan Garcia Devin Haney doubleheader at Barclays in Brooklyn last year. And Barboza was in a fight against a guy named McComb. I think he might have been a southpaw, taller, longer. And the DAZN scorer was scoring the fight for the other guy. And I was watching the fight and thinking, I'm not sure what he's looking at. And I'm scoring round after round for Barboza. And I was very gratified that I turned out to be, if you want to call something in boxing a correct score because the official scorer scored with you and the fighter that you thought won the fight actually won the fight, that's what happened to me that night. Of course, it's all arbitrary. It is all highly personal. You can never say to yourself, "Oh, I failed." If you score a boxing match differently than somebody else, it's highly subjective, and people see different things in fights. But I saw Barboza winning that night, and I'm glad to see him back on the card again.
yeah, I agree. And it's what you said is very true that you never really know what you're watching the first time either. Like me, I got into boxing with my old man, kind of like how most I always joke how most Mexican Americans are raised. Like boxing in your life, whether you like it or not, it's in your house at the very minimum. And that was like a way of bonding with my dad growing up. And we always had a rule: we watch every fight 3 times because the
Well,
first.
I think most young men get boxing from their fathers or an uncle or a neighbor who lives down the street. But it is definitely a taste and an experience that's handed down from generation to generation, and that's the way it's always been. My father died when I was 5 years old, And my mother had watched fights with him, had watched a lot of Gillette Friday Night Fights with him. And I was 6 years old when she sat me down and said, sit here, um, look at this little television set. You're going to be watching Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson for the middleweight championship of the world. That was 1955. That was the first fight I ever watched, and that was the jumping off point for what became thousands of similar experiences all through the rest of my life.
Wow, that's amazing that you remember that. It's so funny
Oh,
because I think about those times, about my earliest fights that I vividly remember, and I just get nothing but excited when I think about it. It's
well, I'll
very
never forget that my mother said, I want you to watch Sugar Ray Robinson. He's my favorite fighter because he dances while he fights. And I wasn't quite sure what she meant by that until I watched him and realized, oh yeah, he is balletic. Actually, I don't think I used that word at that time, but I could see in Sugar Ray Robinson what she saw, and later that was the same kind of thing that prompted me to fall in love with Muhammad Ali.
Absolutely, yeah. And you guys had a great relationship, and I that was one of the things I was actually very like happy to watch. I was doing a little research before our interview, which I mean I know a lot about you already, but you just give the respect to the interviewee. But I saw you say some very very nice things about Muhammad Ali, and his relationship with your daughters and stuff like that. Can you elaborate a little bit on your relationship that you have with Muhammad Ali?
I The very first live prize fight I ever attended was Cassius Clay versus Sonny Liston, February 25, 1964, in Miami Beach. I saved lawn mowing and car washing ticket for lawn mowing and car washing money, I should say, for months to buy that ticket. And wound up going to the fight by myself. My mother dropped me off. So I witnessed on February 25, 1964, the biggest upset in boxing history to that moment. And Cassius Clay was already my idol. 2 days later, he was Muhammad Ali. 44 years after that, he babysat my daughter during the United States Boxing Writers Association annual awards dinner in New York. That's a precious memory that both my daughter and I will take for the rest of our lives. The night that he taught her magic tricks and card tricks and occupied her for hours so that I didn't have to worry about her while I emceed this lengthy awards dinner at Trump's Hotel on 34th Street in New York. And the story is in the book about me riding home with her that night in a cab to her mother's apartment uptown, and her turning to me, 8 years old, and asking, Dad, who was that guy? And I said, well, you'll grow up and you'll read about him and you'll learn about him, and all of that will be clear to you. But just so you have something to take to bed tonight, what I'll tell you is he's the most famous man in the world. And nobody can logically dispute that he's the most famous man in the world. It's a given based on his history. And she said, you mean I was just babysat for several hours by the most famous man in the world? And I said, yes, you were. So that was a shaping experience for my daughter, which helped her to seize on the notion that she's special, that, that naturally life generous things are going to happen to her. And now she is very elevated and authoritative in the art world. She's one of the leading art marketers in the entire world. And I'm 100% convinced that the sense of self she got from her evening with Muhammad Ali has something to do with that.
Wow, that's incredible. That's an amazing story. I'm sure a lot of it comes from you as well. I mean, your story that you've told about how just how you even got into HBO boxing is pretty incredible. Especially because, it the way you describe it, I heard you describe it in an interview was basically how it was on a whim that like basically they just kind of gave you a lucky chance. And
Well, they wanted to get rid of me. The brand new chief executive of ABC Sports at that time in 1986 had arrived from another division of the network, the owned and operated stations division. And the only thing he knew about the sports division was who is Jim Lampley and why are we paying him all this money? And he was very determined to get rid of me. And on the basis of my personal style and also the fact that the audience would see me as the successor to Howard Cosell, he thought that by assigning me to boxing, he could embarrass me. He could publicly destroy me. He would get rid of me. He would force me to walk out of ABC Sports. And I did eventually leave ABC Sports, but not before developing enough of a niche in the boxing space that I was asked to call fights on HBO. And HBO was, of course, the pinnacle of boxing at that time. And I was folded into HBO at about the same time that they signed Mike Tyson to an ongoing contract. So I wound up calling a few Tyson fights at HBO after I had gotten started calling Tyson fights at ABC.
That's so awesome. I like that story too because I've interviewed so many people now, and a lot of the times whenever they get their foot in the door in something where they get their break, it's very similar to the story you just told, where they kind of get thrown to the wolves, or maybe it's a decision made out of malice from someone up on top of them. It happens all the time, and it's so interesting how it actually ends up developing their character, making them better, putting them in the spotlight, even when they aren't ready and performing at the highest level. When you're in these early parts of your career, um, what was your mindset when you're doing all these fights? Did you ever feel like you're in a flow state? Like I'm sure you're prepared, but did you ever feel like I'm calling these fights, I don't even know what's coming out of my mouth, but it's just working and I'm just in the zone? Did you ever feel that at any point?
Well, there was an executive at ABC Sports at that time, later went on to become a major executive at Disney. His name was Alex Wallow. And Alex was a spit and polished Greenwich guy, had grown up getting on trains and subways and going to boxing gyms in Manhattan and Brooklyn so that he could drink in all the boxing he could get at very close range. So when I first started calling fights at ABC, he became my mentor. He was the one who was signing fighters to contracts. He had signed Mike Tyson to his get-attained look-see contract at ABC, and he called me up to his apartment, which wasn't too much farther north than mine in the city. And I wound up going to his apartment day after day for months to look at how the natural body puncher will hold the opponent away from the referee on the opposite side of the ring, or to look at how the two fighters' feet naturally come together when a southpaw is facing a conventional fighter, and how the advantage in that matchup is usually going to go to whichever fighter can keep his front foot on the outside of the other fighter. I spent months learning technical details like that from Alex before I ever went up to Glens Falls, New York to call Mike Tyson against Jesse Ferguson. So I got a great education from a great instructor. I had natural interest in boxing that had been given to me by my mother and by my late father. And my idol was Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali. How could I go wrong? It all turned out okay for me.
It absolutely did. Yeah, an amazing career. And it's funny how you mentioned your like your role models or the people that were your mentors, and because I always feel like sometimes they come in at a time where you don't even realize it or you don't see them coming. Um, we're good friends with Rudy Hernandez, and he longtime cut man, just an amazing person of boxing and the UFC. And his brother Chikunito was a hell of a fighter. And one of the stories that he told me that stuck out to me, and it's just another reason why I love boxing so much, is because you just won't hear this often. But growing up, like Mayweather was the biggest fighter in my era, and you either loved him or you hate him, whatever people did. But one of the stories that Rudy told me was that Floyd went up to Rudy and he told him, like, your brother, I had your brother's poster on my wall when I was a kid. He's like, I put it on the ceiling and I would look at it every day. He's like, because I wanted to be like Chico, I wanted to be like your brother. He's like, it was hard for me to realize I couldn't be that because he's like, there's nobody like your brother. I couldn't fight like him. I tried to. He's like, then it got me in trouble. I broke my hands. Like I couldn't do it.
Talking about Gennaro Hernandez,
Yes, sir.
what a stylist!
Unbelievable.
He was a brilliant stylist, and he had vision and coordination that went beyond what most fighters had. And yeah, that's a great family and have produced meaningful people in boxing.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I mean, Floyd paid for his funeral when he passed away, and to hear how that comes full circle is just so great because you never know who you're going to impact. You never know who did what behind the scenes. It's a beautiful thing. One thing I want to talk about too, um, was all your most famous calls that you've ever had, which a lot of people do know about. Everyone knows about your main ones, but I wanted to talk about more my favorite call. And my favorite call of yours is 100% without a doubt the Juan Manuel Márquez Pacquiao fourth fight, where you did the send off to end the fight, and you're talking about Juan Manuel. That fight I remember vividly. I remembered all three of them vividly leading up to that, and it was. I think everyone, even in the world, felt the same way about Juan Manuel. We felt like, wow, like he's how do you not like this guy? But it's not like anyone hated Pacquiao. It just how do you not like Juan Manuel? He's getting this close. There's draws. He can't win, and you just felt like, man, he's like almost like the Rocky of the story. Like he can't get there, but he's a fan favorite. And I remember that fight vividly. I remember I was watching it with my brother, and my old man was actually he was a police officer at the time. He's retired, but he drove. He was working overtime. He drove to the house and he's full uniform. Like, what happened? What's going on? And then the first knockdown happened, and then Pacquiao knocked him back down, and then the final one happened, and it was unbelievable. But I actually have written down here what you said. Do you mind if I read to you what, and so the listeners can hear what you said as a send off?
Of course, I don't mind.
You said Juan Manuel Marquez has, through the bulk of his career, been one of the great victims of subjective cruelty of life. Early in his career, overshadowed for years by his Mexican countrymen Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales, both of whom were seen as more spectacular fighters, more fun to watch. So he changed his style in mid-career, took more risks, became a little bit more of a boxer-puncher, more of a banger, traded more. He got some unexpected knockdowns as a result from lesser fighters, but he kept biding his time and getting better. He's the smartest counterpuncher in boxing. He used it in 3 fights to bedevil Manny Pacquiao without ever getting a win. Yesterday, he told us he would try harder for the knockout. And why shouldn't he? For the latter part of his career, for the most time, he's been the number 3 fighter in the world, in a sport in which the public only recognize two, Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. After tonight, they'll recognize Juan Manuel Marquez.
Wow, that's a pretty good call. I have to say I'm proud of that. And of course, it was a colossal event, an amazing, definitive knockout win for Marquez. My wife is not the only fan I have heard tell me that they thought for a moment that Pacquiao was dead. The truly great, well-timed counterpunch can create that kind of thunder. But yeah, it was a colossal moment for a genuinely great fighter, Juan Manuel Marquez.
Absolutely. I think just you getting emotional while you were speaking about it is what I think everyone felt the same way you did in that moment. Everyone did. Like, and it wasn't like, again, it wasn't because people hated people liked I loved Pacquiao. He's one of my favorite fighters. It was because everyone was like rooting for the underdog. He was waiting for his chance and he finally got it. And it wasn't a boxing story at that point. It was a life story. Like finally someone who
Yes,
worked his
that's
butt off.
exactly the point. These are human beings, and boxing to me is the most human sport. And we see them at their worst, and sometimes we see them at their best. And there's something majestic about the contrast. And he just happened to be a great, brilliant human being who managed to access the best in him at the most critical moment, and will forever be remembered for that knockout of Manny Pacquiao.
Absolutely, yeah. I agree. That is what boxing is. It's the most relatable. It's the reason why Rocky is what it is. It's the reason why he loses at the end and no one cares and the music's triumphant and he's in love and the movie ends and it's you don't even most of the time people don't even realize he lost and they don't care because it's not a boxing movie. It really isn't. Boxing's just part of the movie, but it's more of a, if anything, it's a love story. It's a triumphant story. It's a beautiful story about anyone can make it, and that's why boxing is so relatable, and that's why it's a perfect sport. I couldn't love it more.
Well, I think there are a lot of sports in which you can win while losing, but I think boxing is number one, front and center in that regard. When people see true courage, when people see valiant sportsmanship, when people see the kind of love that grows between two fighters who appear for 12 rounds to try to beat each other to death and are actually earning more and more respect and affection for each other as each punch sails. And they realize that they've seen something special and highly unusual. Unique is an overused word. I try to stay away from saying that things are unique anymore because the word has been ruined by popular culture. Incredible is another one. Way too overused, way too ruined. But by the classical definitions, only one on the planet, and incredible, absolutely not to be believed. Boxing comes up with that more than any other sport.
I couldn't agree more. I think the perfect example of what you just described will be Mickey Ward, Arturo Gatti. That is the perfect example of what you just described. It's three fights, it's brotherhood, it's war, it's absolute war, bloody, painful war. It's love. It's love and death. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. And I mean, hell, I've gone back and just for fun had drinks and just honestly rewatched the fights because in my head they're still happening. Like I don't. That's the other great thing about boxing is you don't. No one really goes back and watches old Super Bowls, you know, or but people go back and watch old fights all the time. It's the best. I do all the time. It's my favorite thing to do. But what was that Mickey Ward Arturo Gatti trilogy to you? What does that mean to you?
Well, Mickey Ward and Arturo Gatti is the perfect example of what I'm talking about when I say that you can watch two guys seemingly trying to beat each other to death for 12 rounds. And what's really happening is that they are falling in love. Mickey and Arturo fought 3 times. All of them were blood curdling, life changing, probably in some ways physical diminishing type face to face confrontations. They were extremely violent. They were in some ways difficult to watch. They were great, great fights. And all the time, those two guys were falling more and more in love with every passing moment. I have a million great memories of the two of them together. Maybe my favorite one in my head right now is the two of them insisting after the third fight in Atlantic City on getting into the same medical truck to be taken to the emergency room for evaluation together. They refused separate trucks and insisted, brothers that they now were, that they had to go together. But you know, that's just part and parcel of what a truly great rivalry is, and the story I always tell after the first fight in the Mohegan Sun Casino. And the first fight was stunning to watch, and you'll remember Emmanuel Stewart shouting, "Oh my God," over and over, and you know, a kind of combat you just didn't think you were going to see. And after it was over, Emmanuel and I and Max Kellerman gathered up our stuff and got ready to leave uh, the position there. So I walked hallway of the Mohegan Sun Casino and ran into Gaddy's manager, Pat Lynch. And Pat was bereft and he had tears in his eyes and he couldn't get a hold of his mood. He was crying and trembling. And I said, Pat, you know, What is it that is so bothering you? He said, I can't believe we lost. I said, Pat, if we gathered up every single spectator who was in this arena tonight, every single spectator who saw and felt everything that you and I saw and felt during this fight, brought them back here a year and a half from now, and asked them who won. How many of them, how many of them do you think will actually remember the official result of the fight? That isn't what matters. They both won, and they have both won for the rest of their lives, regardless of who the judges chose officially. Those two fighters know that they fought a totally even fight, toe to toe, face to face, for as long as any human being could consider the possibility of doing it. And they both walked out of here with their heads held high. It does not matter who the judges chose. And I'll believe that till my dying day. The truly great fights, it doesn't matter who won. And a lot of times people can't remember. They only remember that they saw something unlike anything else they've ever seen in their lives. And they saw two human beings go as far as they can possibly go to try to prove themselves. And at the same time, they were watching those two men fall in love. That's what fighting is.
Couldn't have said it better, Jim. Yeah, you have a knack of making me cry. You're good at that, Jim. I appreciate it. Wow, that is very beautifully said. And you're right. It's more than a sport. It always has been, and it's led you to the position you're in now. For the last couple of years, I've wondered, what's Jim Lampley up to? And we as boxing,
Writing a book.
yeah, yeah, and that's what was really cool is like you hope that's what you're doing. Like as a fan, of yours and Roy Jones Jr. and Max Kellerman, you hope that there's things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. That's the hope. And boxing has been a little bit for me personally. There's some fights that I enjoy for sure. It's been amazing watching Usyk fight and Beterbiev and Bivol, and there's some fighters I really enjoy watching still, and Terrence Crawford. But there's been a lot of disappointing things for me over the last 10 years personally. I'm not speaking on behalf of everyone, but on me personally, there's just been some things that just aren't that have like not turned me away from the sport. Have really upset me. Like Canelo Triple G #1 was like the one that bothered me the most. I thought Triple G won, but I had him 8 rounds to 4. I don't know how that's a draw. There's been a lot of fights since where you're just like, this it sucks. It sucks to see things like this. Not to say that there hasn't been good things, but the one thing that I missed the most was, I think the thing that really killed my heart a little bit the most was HBO Boxing going away. That killed my heart. That killed my soul for a long time because that was the only thing I knew. That was the only thing anybody knew. When the 24/7 started coming out and, Mayweather's promoting that and we could see the behind the scenes and hearing you talk about whatever in training camp and all that stuff. Like, and now we're getting 4 episodes before the fight. It was just HBO Boxing was the mecca of everything. And you were just, as a fan, you were just praying that like that Jim Lampley and Roy Jones and Max Kellerman that were going to come back. Like you had no like inclination that it would happen. You didn't know, but like now that you're coming out with your book and you're going to be ringside again, it's like it's almost like, man, it's like we're back. It feels so damn good, and I'm very happy about it.
Well, we'll see. I hope I can still call fights at that level. I'm pretty sure that I can, and I will certainly do the best I can. And I think that yes, what fans and people like you have told me is that certainly it will be part of my job to bring back some of that HBO aura, that HBO enthusiasm, that HBO atmosphere. But I'll also do whatever my new employers want me to do, and they have certainly earned the right with their financial support of boxing and their enthusiasm for boxing. They've earned the right to play a big role in determining how we present and what we do.
Yeah, well, if they're smart, Mr. Lampley, they'll let you take the reins, and you'll see everyone be happy. But about your book, sir, I'm very excited. I was actually going to pre-order it on Amazon, but I was hoping I can try to get one from you directly. I'd like to be cool to get a little autograph inside of one of them. But
well, I'll tell Deborah to get your address. We have advanced copies, and we can send you one.
Perfect.
So I will instruct Deborah to get your address and send it to you.
That'd be great. I'm very happy about that. Thank you. The book's called It Happened. It's obviously referencing your most famous call, which was George Foreman versus the Michael Moore fight. And again, your retelling of that story is also one of the coolest things I've ever heard ever. It's it's again another story of why it's bigger than boxing and why that it's projection of your life. It's showing that what you think you can do and having foresight in your vision and it's so important to not just the sport of boxing but in regular life. So for him, for George to tell you what he was doing and to be his age and more to be so young, it just adds more of that the romance of boxing.
It was one of those moments when I was wondering, I concocted a phrase in advance because George had told me for a few weeks what he thought was going to happen. And I really did not have a prepared phrase in my mind. And all I could think is, okay, he told me this. He said, there's going to come a moment sometime late in the fight, and he'll come and stand in front of me and let me knock him out. And now this count is going to 10. And all I could think is, it happened. He told me it was going to happen. It happened. So that's how that call spontaneously became. It happened. It happened. 20 years after his loss to Muhammad Ali, George Foreman has regained the heavyweight championship of the world. What a person. What an amazing competitor. What an amazing philosopher. What an amazing friend. George Foreman is great in many different ways, and he proved his greatness that night.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Um, it's one of those things that I feel a phrase like that only comes from your heart and your gut. I really do feel that way. It's Holy Toledo, it's anything you can think of from Vince Scully, or it's past the bag, everything. It doesn't matter what, like whenever a call happens, it's anything's just natural. And I feel like no one can recreate those moments because in that moment, you're just speaking from the most primal thing you have. Your heart and your stomach and your brain, they all somewhat connect together and they just create something special. And I believe that wholeheartedly that every sport is beautiful in its own right, but the thing that makes it beautiful are the people that talk about it, the people that actually tell you play by play what it is. And I know that firsthand. I mean, my off topic, but like my grandparents, my grandma was a women's baseball Hall of Fame player, and like she talks about Vince Scully, like that was a hero. Like we sit down and talk. I'm like, and she's in their 90s, but any sport, football, they all have announcers like that make that important. So credit to you. Without people like you, the sport would be beautiful, but not as beautiful. It definitely is the final touch on the sport.
And now, Danny, I'm running out of power. So we will have to postpone any further discussion to another time. But it's been great spending this time with you. Again, the title of the autobiography is It Happened. It publishes April 15, but it's available now for advance order on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Obviously, the author is Jim Lampley. And I'm expecting to be calling fights at ringside in Times Square May 2. So be sure to tune in and watch what happens in Times Square live outdoors in New York. And Jim Lampley's return to boxing blow by blow. Let's see if this kid can still call fights.
I'm sure you
Maybe,
can, sir.
maybe not.
Before you take off, I'm going to read you one quote of your last quote for HBO. You said, "If I never work on the air again, which is quite possible, I'm cool with that because I had a life that far exceeded anything I could have imagined. And every bit of it was an unexpected gift. So that's how I feel tonight. I feel the beneficiary of a totally unexpected gift. It was great."
I did say that, and I meant every word of it. And I genuinely appreciate you repeating and recreating that because it means so much to me to acknowledge that everything that ever happened to me with regard to boxing and HBO in my career was unexpected and an indelible life treasure that I will remember for as long as I'm on this planet.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Jim. I know you got to get going. Everyone, the book's called It Happened. Go pre-order it now. and tune in on May 2nd to watch Jim Lampley call fights again.
Thank you, Danny. Talk to you later.
Thank you, sir. Take care. This has been Alternate
Bye.
Take. We'll see you guys later. Peace.